infrastructure build out. But I think we do have the very person to follow Brendan Carr's outstanding work. I also want to say thank you to his competent staff. His staff is Will and Will Adams. They've always been open, very willing to listen to our concerns and issues, and I think it's paid off for everyone. As I said, the next person up is no stranger to wireless issues. We're pleased to have with us the U.S. Department of Commerce Assistant Secretary for Communications and Information, David Redl. Now, David is an attorney, and I like to consider him, like myself, a recovering attorney, but he's also a communication policy expert with more than a decade of experience in government and the private sector. Prior to his current position, he served as Chief Counsel, House Energy and Commerce Committee, Telecom Subcommittee. He's certainly no stranger to our issues. He's been part and parcel to solutions we've found, legislative and regulatory, over the years. David has always had an open door and an open mind to the challenges experienced by small carriers. And as David knows, carriers need infrastructure, enhanced siting, and of course, spectrum. Now here's the guy in Washington, D.C. that's freeing up quality spectrum for wireless carriers and consumers alike. And now we get to hear from the man himself. Let's have a warm welcome for the Assistant Secretary of Commerce, David Redl. David.
Well, thanks, everybody. It's good to be here. Brendan's a hard act to follow. I followed him and his wife 1 year behind them in the same law school. So I will say, while we are not going to make dating great again, I am similarly glad, having met my wife 17 years ago, to have found her before the smartphone was invented. I'm not sure I could have cut it in the marketplace of the smartphone. I'm really excited to be here at CCA because I feel like CCA's members have something in common with NTIA. When I was going through the Senate confirmation process, in my testimony, I talked a lot about the agency itself and the people at the agency. And I've described NTIA as an agency that punches well above its weight class. NTIA is very small by government standards. We're about 1/6 the size of the Federal Communications Commission. And we have in our portfolio a massive number of issues, almost all of which impact not just wireless telecom, but wired telecom, the internet, all the things that we hold near and dear. And the one thing I've found in my job, and I'm sure many of you have found the same, is that the smaller the group you are dealing with, the more important every person is. So if you will indulge me in my discussion of what we're doing on 5G, I'd like to highlight for you specifically some of the work that some of NTIA's employees are doing. I'm going to focus on 3 areas. First, our Office of Spectrum Management. As Steve noted, spectrum, lifeblood of the wireless industry. It is what allows us to continue to do what we do, to push the bleeding edge of what's possible on our mobile devices, and it's what led us to be the world leader in 4G LTE. It's what's going to allow us to be the world leader in 5G. And not just in urban areas, everywhere. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir to this group when I say we have to remember that 5G is a technology that has promise in both urban and rural areas. It has promise to bring broadband mobility to everyone in this country. I hope what came out of last week's 5G summit at the White House is that the Trump administration is behind that goal 100%. If you missed it, the Trump administration held a summit at the White House last Friday. At it, we had leaders from the House, the Senate, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, myself, Chairman Pai, and the leader of the National Economic Council, Larry Kudlow, all affirming that America is going to be first in 5G. And being first in 5G means working hand in hand with one of the president's other goals, which is bringing broadband to the parts of this country that have yet to be served. You all are doing that, and we greatly appreciate the contributions you make every day in serving your neighbors, in serving people down the street, in serving areas that are not being served. That's the real value of this membership, and I want to thank you personally for the work you all have been doing. Our Office of Spectrum Management, talking about the people, is led by Acting Associate Administrator Peter Tenhula. And OSM, as we lovingly call it, represents roughly half of the employees at NTIA. They spend all day, every day, working to make sure our federal agencies have the spectrum they need to achieve their critical missions, but also working to make sure spectrum that's been identified for the commercial sector and spectrum that can be identified for the commercial sector is brought to market. We're hard at work making sure the AWS-3 transition goes through in the way that those of you that bid on licenses in AWS-3 expected. It's a long process. Anyone who's taken part in the relocation process in any of the bands knows there are always challenges, but our staff continues to rise to meet those challenges. AWS-3 is moving along apace, and we're excited about that. But we're also looking at ways to bring more spectrum to market. Last December, we announced that we would take a look at 3.45 to 3.55, 3450 to 3550 megahertz. That's a spectrum immediately below the 3.5 gigahertz CBRS band. It's 100 megahertz that we're taking a look at to say maybe this can be reallocated. It's contiguous to some other spectrum that works for the wireless industry, and maybe it's something that we can make available to ensure that we continue our 5G leadership and leadership going beyond 5G. There's a lot of work left to be done. We know there's going to be a lot of work left to be done to make sure that we can support our government incumbents that are in that band, but we're excited to do the hard work and to try to bring that to market to make the industry more prosperous. On spectrum front, I'm going to take you out of our Washington, D.C. office and our Office of Spectrum Management, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the technology behind our spectrum. Take you to Boulder, Colorado, where NTIA has the Institute for Telecommunication Sciences. It's our lab, where we have just over 60 engineers who spend all day, every day, doing world-class work on RF interference mitigation, on trying to make systems work together so that we have better electromagnetic compatibility, and frankly, on bringing CBRS to life. I'm excited about the announcement that was in press recently about the FCC taking additional steps to bring the CBRS band to market, and NTIA, through ITS, is doing its part. The CBRS spectrum is dependent on two systems that we are testing right now in Boulder. One is called the Spectrum Access System, and the other, the Environmental Sensing Capability. At bottom, these two systems will allow us to take a fresh new look at the way government systems and commercial systems work together that we're hopeful will serve as a template for additional spectrum being made available. The SAS controls when devices can use spectrum, and the ESC listens for those critical government radars that are already in the band for when they're on and when they're not, to make sure that Navy radars can operate, but that when we have no operation in the band, the commercial users can use it. It's a big deal, and I know that I'm preaching to the choir in this group, but the idea that we could take a band of spectrum that previously we had said would have to be subject to exclusion or previously wouldn't be available for commercial use and say, actually, we can be more efficient here. We can look over the time domain and say, maybe there's an opportunity for us to do more, to get more out there into the marketplace to fuel the kind of innovation we see across the entire wireless ecosystem. That led us to the work we're doing on dynamic protection areas, DPAs. For those of you that have gone through a relocation, you know when we do auctions in this country where we have government incumbents or where we have stations that cannot be moved, whether in frequency or in location, we set up exclusion zones. We say effectively, this area is off limits. You can't use this area. And that stays in place essentially forever. Dynamic protection areas could change that and make it so that those areas are not permanently off limits. They're only off limits in the times when we need them. It's really exciting work. I'm really proud of the work they're doing out in Boulder, and I hope you all have been following it. If you're not, it's really exciting times for us at NTIA. The last piece I'd like to talk a little bit about in terms of making 5G ready dovetails very well with what Commissioner Carr spoke about, which is our work back in DC. Doug Kinkoff and his team, Karen Hansen, Amy Meacham, and others, Laura Spinning, on making sure that we are working with state and local governments to not only lower barriers for you to deploy, but also to get a better broadband map and look at what's happening on the ground. On the Broadband USA side, we have the State Broadband Leaders Network. Our team has taken the group of folks who we've worked with on grants over the years and put together a coalition of broadband officers in states who are willing to do the hard work to get their state and local governments on board to lower barriers to deployment. Whether that means doing mapping in-house for each state, making rights of way available in a more streamlined manner, or just simply caring enough to reach out and say, we have a need and are willing to make our town available if you will provide service here. The State Broadband Leaders Network has been a really amazing tool for us to take best practices from one part of the country and move them to another. On the mapping front, as many of you know, last year in the omnibus, the 18 omnibus bill in the Congress, we were given some money by Congress to do mapping work. As you know, the FCC has a broadband map, and the FCC does a great job of taking the Form 477 data that they have and making that available so that people can see where people are reporting they have service. But I think everybody in this room knows that's only part of the story. Congress said to us, we want the rest of the story. Can you work to bring us more information, to bring us better data, to bring us a better picture of how things look in rural America? Because typically that's where we're seeing the biggest challenges with the broadband map. I want to thank CCA, and I want to thank CCA's members. We've done a lot of outreach to carriers, to states, to companies that do mapping. CCA and its members have been fantastic in their suggestions, in their willingness to work with us, and frankly, in showing us that there is a lot going on out there that those maps don't reflect. So thank you on behalf of my team for the hard work you all are doing to help us. We're looking forward in the next couple of months to putting out an RFP where we'll be asking for proposals on putting together a technological platform for mapping this data, and we're hoping to announce some pilot states in the coming months where we'll be trying to do a better job of fleshing out that complete story of what service looks like in those states. The last thing I want to hit on is the work that we're doing through the President's Broadband Interagency Working Group. Secretary Perdue at the Department of Agriculture was tasked with putting together a rural prosperity task force. They reported out to the President and they had a number of recommendations. One of them was making broadband more available in rural America. Out of that, the Broadband Interagency Working Group was revived with NTIA and the Department of Agriculture at the helm. Our team at NTIA, working with our ag colleagues, have taken a hard look at 3 areas of interest for us. First, streamlining permitting. What Commissioner Carr, Chairman Pai, Commissioner O'Reilly, Commissioner Rosenworcel voted on last week will help you with municipalities, but you still have a challenge with the US government. And we appreciate that it is not easy to go through the permitting process. In our offices, we actually have this giant flow chart that shows us just how painful the permitting process can be with the US government. And that really hit home. So through this Broadband Interagency Working Group, we've brought together all of the agencies in the US government and said, how can we make this easier? Where can we streamline things? Can we make this a process where there's one touch within the US government to streamline all of these together? Turns out there were a lot of people with a lot of ideas on how to make it better. We're bringing those together and we're looking forward to reporting those to the President soon. The second area we looked at, bringing our federal assets to bear on the challenge. Particularly in rural America, the US government is the largest landowner in the United States. If you look at the permitting, we don't make it easy, but we're trying to figure out ways to take the land in our portfolio, the towers, the utility poles, the buildings, any other structure, and how can we make those available to those who want to invest in bringing broadband to parts of the country that are currently unserved. It's a big task. Again, there's a lot of people in the US government, a lot of different agencies that have to be willing to participate. And thanks to the leadership in this administration, they've all come together and we're trying to bring that to bear. We're excited about the prospect there to be able to provide not only streamlined permitting, but some assets that you all can take advantage of as well as you build out. The last piece we're looking at, and perhaps the most challenging, is taking a look at the ways that the US government supports broadband investment in this country and figuring out if those things are working together. We have a lot of programs within the US government that provide loans, grants, and other types of support for broadband investment. The left hand doesn't always talk to the right hand. What we were asked to do is take those programs and say, are they working in the most efficient way? Is there a way we can improve coordination amongst the different pieces of the US government in order to make sure that when we invest in a broadband project, we're getting the best bang for the taxpayer's buck? All 3 of those work streams are coming together in a report we are excited about. Hopefully we'll have some things to announce in the near future. But suffice it to say, I hope what you are taking away from my discussion today is that the administration understands that this is an issue that has to be addressed. In order to make 5G a reality in this country, we know the private sector is all in. We've gotten that message from companies large and small, from equipment vendors to carriers, from handset manufacturers. Everyone in the entire wireless ecosystem has made it very clear they're all in on America being first in 5G. I hope what you take away from what I've said today is that the US government is behind you 100%, and we're willing to help in however we can. Thank you for having me down here today. It's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces, and I hope you have a great show.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate it. Hope you keep doing